Passwords Part 1, Windows. In this nugget, we take a look at hacking passwords. This is part 1 where we address Windows passwords, and we'll address something about the nature of them, where they're found, and so forth. Although it's not really in a file that you can double-click and open, certainly they're going to be hashes. The hashes are really the key in all of this, because they're a mathematical function that makes it difficult, if not impossible, to really look at the hash itself and identify the password. That's the whole point of this. But there are ways of cracking those, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate to you here in this nugget. Years ago, when I was a teenager, many years ago, I found out that my sister was keeping a diary. It was kind of intriguing to me, and I really didn't care what was in it, except for the fact that she had a tiny little lock on it. It was one of those things that had a small lock with a little key, and only she would know where the key was and all of this. Well, one day, while she was out of the house, I got extremely curious, wondering if I could open that lock or pick the lock, even though I couldn't find the key anywhere. So I got a little paper clip out, and I kind of bent it all different directions, and I was starting to twist it inside of the lock, and what do you know, but the thing popped open, and I could see that I could open up this diary, and I just kind of flipped through the pages. I didn't actually even care what was in it. In fact, I don't remember reading anything that was in there. But when my sister got home, I told her, guess what? I was able to pick your lock even without using the key. And of course she got furious, claiming that I had read her whole diary. Well, I never actually denied that. I never said that I read it, but I never denied it either. So all of these years, until we were done and grew up and left the home, she always thought that I had read her whole diary, which was great for arguments. Because anytime we had a disagreement, I would say, you know what? I've read your diary, and you should be ashamed. And it was a guaranteed way to win an argument from that day forward. Now here in this nugget we're talking about Windows passwords. In the next nugget we'll talk about some principles of good passwords, being realistic about passwords, as well as cracking Linux passwords. So here we're talking about Windows. Now for passwords, and this really applies to not just Windows passwords, but many other operating systems, you're generally going to use hashed values. The principle behind this is you don't want the literal password to ever be stored anywhere on the hard drive, for example. You wouldn't want it to be stored in a file somewhere, so that if someone could find that file, they just double-click it and, I don't know, crack it open in Notepad or something and find the password. Well, that doesn't really work that way. What happens is it's run through a hash. Now, a hash is a mathematical algorithm that will generate a unique result. So, you take whatever your password is, you run it through the hash like an MD5 hash. Out of that is going to be a mathematical result that only that original password could have produced. And they're non-reversible as well, so they're one-way hashes. This is going to be different than a reversible hash. If you think about this in terms of math, it might become simpler. So, for example, my son is a 7th grader now, and he's already in algebra that I can't understand, or I don't remember how to do. Okay, I never knew how to do it, okay? But anyway, so I'll take a simple math, and we'll take a look at it this way, all right? Let's take the number 40, all right? Well, what is 5 divided into 40? Well, that would equal 8, wouldn't it? I think. Is that right? Yeah, it would. Okay, it would be 8. You could reverse that as well. You could take the same number, 40, and take 8 and divide it into 40, and that would equal 5, right? So that's kind of reversible, so to speak. You can run it a couple of different ways. Well, with a hashed value password, it's one way, so that once you generate the unique mathematical result, there's no way to reverse calculate it. All right? Let's take a look at where the passwords are stored as well. In Windows 2000, Server 2003 and older operating systems, going back since the beginning of Windows operating systems, they're generally going to be storing those passwords in what we call a repair directory. What's the purpose of this? Well, just kind of as the name implies, it is used for recovering from a backup. So when you would perform a backup, for example, using NT backup or some other methods, what would happen is it would take all of the user accounts that are on the local hard drive or on the local operating system, and it would store them in the repair directory, and it would store their passwords there as well, even though it might be kind of an encrypted format. Let me see if I have anything open that I can show you here. All right, here's the Windows 2003 machine, all right? So if I crack this open, let me just go to my computer, then we can see that on the C drive, under Windows, and then Repair, down here, that we have a SAM file right here. Now, what is this? This is just where all of the accounts and their passwords are stored. Now, again, they're not passwords that are stored in plain text of some type. You can't just double click on it and open it up in Notepad. It's all kind of obfuscated and so forth. However, that is where they're stored. As a result of knowing where they're stored, there's some hacking utilities and software and such that you could run against that SAM, and it might still be able to get at least the hashed values out of that file. Once it gets the hashed values, then you can use software to be able to run password guessing, so to speak, against those hashed values, and once they find a hash value that matches, the software will know that it's found out what the password is. We'll look at that here again in a little while. In Active Directory environments, it doesn't really use this directly anymore. Now it will use the ntds.dit file. Again, this is also a file that you can't directly crack against. You can't double-click it, open it in Notepad, or anything like that. For both the SAM file, which is in the repair directory, and the ntds.dit file, these are files that are restricted as being locked and in use. So while the operating system is running, you can't directly access them. But, again, there's utilities that are able to kind of copy them, so to speak, or that are able to reach inside of them and extract the contents for use later on. And generally, a lot of the hacking utilities and password crackers will make a copy of what it needs of the hash, and then you can store that in a file, for example, and then you can run an offline attack against it. And the advantage of an offline attack is that it's undetectable. So it's not like it's going to be a real noisy network scan of some type. It's going to be able to run that scan even on your home computer. You might have, gotten the password hashes, stored them on a thumb drive, go home, run it all night against your own machine at home without being able to be detected by the original company from which you stole those hashes. Now let's take a look at some of the Windows hash methods that have been used. If we go back into the old days, we're looking at LANman and NT-LAN Manager. LANman is mostly like Windows 95, 98, so really old. And the way it would work would be this. And even though we don't really see this much anymore, I'm still going to discuss it briefly because there's some similarities between this and it kind of chains down to these other methods. They're more secure, but it starts with this as a basis. So let's say that this rectangle here represents your password. Oh, that's not a very straight line. Sorry about that, folks. I'm not a straight guy. Well, that didn't come out right. Let me try that again. Using a little Photoshop magic this time. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to make sure that I draw straight lines. Despite all my denials, you can see that I'm a straight person. Except for that one. Okay, let's try that again. One more time. There we go. Okay, what happens here is we don't know how long the user's password is. And what LAN Manager does is it will take the password, regardless of how long it is, and divide it up into two parts. And it's going to be two equal 7-character parts. Now let's say that my password is 7 characters or less. That means that this side of it is always going to be predictable. When a hash runs against an empty value here, the hash value will always be the same. So that's going to be predictable on this side. Therefore, your password crackers, it's always going to look for the second half, and if it's a predictable value, it'll know that it's a short password of 7 characters or less, and then it'll apply all the CPU cycles against cracking only this portion of it. Okay, so that's how a LAN Manager password works. Now, NT-LAN Manager, let me try to draw my straight lines again here. This one is going to run a single 16-character value. And that's actually a 16-byte value that goes on here. So because of the fact that it's a single value here instead of split up into two, this makes it computationally speaking more difficult to crack than LAN Manager. Now this is still going to be something that with both of these we have a little bit of a weakness, and that's because both of these will take whatever the password is and it converts it to all uppercase. Okay? So these password cracking utilities, once it figures out what will generate this hash, it's all uppercase and it doesn't really matter what the case is. But in order to get the literal password, that's going to be what we really have to have. Then it's going to run through all possible combinations of upper and lower case for the password that it's guessed so far, and ultimately it's going to be able to figure that out. That shouldn't take very long. NT-LAN Manager, however, with this one, it's going to be a 128-bit key. Is involved in this. So that's, computationally speaking, significantly harder than these other two methods. Not uncrackable, but much, much more difficult at least. And then, of course, we have Kerberos, which is what we currently use in Active Directory environments. All right, now we're going to take a look at Kerberos again here coming up shortly, but for all of this hash stuff, and hashes actually are used for many things besides passwords. It's used for many other security implementations. But let's say that in an MD5 hash, that my password was represented like this by an MD5 hash. Just by looking at this, gee, I have no earthly idea what that password could be, and I don't really even know how long that password is. Okay, it'd be very, very difficult. And just by way of demonstration here as well, there's a little utility that you can download called HashCalc. You can Google for it, but it's from Slavasoft. And with this one, what you can do is you can kind of just, humanly speaking, guess this stuff out, right? So what if I thought that the password was, I don't know, presumptuous? Okay, what would the calculation of that, the hash value, be? If I look at this, and I compare it to this in Notepad, it doesn't look anything like it, does it? Well, I must have guessed wrong then. How about another word? How about dominion? How about that? Let me calculate this. Oh, still doesn't look anything like this one. I must be way off. Well, what am I doing here? This is actually what your password crackers do as well. It's just that they use the power of your CPU in your computer. I'm just using my human brain, and I can only think of, first of all, one thing at a time, and it takes me a few seconds to make each guess. Whereas your CPU is substantially faster than my human brain. It might even be twice as fast as I am. Actually, it's probably like millions of times faster, and so it's able to go through dictionaries and all kinds of brute force attacks and all kinds of things much, much faster than I can here. I'll tell you what, I'm kind of stubborn here, and I really want to figure out what this password is. So let me just give it one more try, and I am going to really give everything I've got here. I'm applying my entire IQ at this, okay? My entire IQ of 72 is going to be applied towards trying to think of the right password. Let me just put in, I don't know, physique. Like that. Did I spell it right? Physique, yes. All right, now why did I come up with the word physique? Because people look at me and they say, hey, James, how did you get that physique? Steroids? No, folks. This kind of physique is only possible by years and years of consuming Krispy Kreme donuts. That's how I was able to achieve this. It doesn't happen overnight, people. You got to work at it. Anyway, let's calculate this and see. Oh, hey, folks, look at that. There's the password. There's the hash right there. It matches exactly. Okay, I cheated a little bit. I already did this before I started recording, and then I cleared out the data here so you wouldn't see me cheating. But anyway, you get the idea there for how these hashes are calculated. Oh, let me do this too. Let me put that word back in, physique, and calculate that again. You would think that if I would just do a little change here, maybe I added an S on the end, physiques, plural, that when I calculate this, it'll just put an S on the end of the hash or something, but guess what? When you do this, it completely changes the hash. There's no way to predict the smallest of changes in the password, how it will affect the actual hash value itself. And by the way, if it's not already clear, what's going on with this is when we finally match the password, let me just recalculate this again, when we match our calculation of the hash against what we see from the computer, then we know that this password must be correct. And that's what your password crackers are doing primarily. Now let's take a look here at Kerberos. Kerberos is really a totally different technology than anything we've looked at here to date in terms of the hashing. It's not, NT-LAN Manager or LAN Manager or NT-LAN Manager version 2. It's totally outside of that whole arena. All I'm going to show you here is kind of an overall view of Kerberos, and it's going to be a very simplified version. We don't really need to know a lot of the details about it, other than kind of how the exchange takes place. Now what happens here is the Kerberos technology involves something called tickets. The reason why we want a ticket is because if we're in possession of that ticket, it proves that we were authenticated by a proper domain controller in a Windows environment, and only the domain controller could have ever issued that ticket to us. Therefore, it must be valid. That's kind of how the thinking goes with this. What happens in an exchange like this is the client is going to ask the key distribution center for a ticket. Let's take a look here. Let's draw a square here representing the client, and then let's draw a server over here. Normally, the Active Directory, this is going to be a domain controller or a key distribution center. Now, the KDC is the generic term, Kerberos term for it. In Microsoft land, we call it a domain controller. And the reason why we have the two different terms is because Microsoft did not invent Kerberos, MIT did. And they initially called it a KDC. There are other implementations that use this, but Microsoft uses it the most in Active Directory. Anyway, the client will ask the KDC for a ticket. Okay, it's asking for a ticket over here. And the key distribution center will reply with a secret key. I'm going to try to draw a key here. Okay, like that. It's either a key or it's a deceased person with their toes pointed upward. Anyway, it'll send back this key, and this key is going to be hashed with the user's password. Now, who knows the user's password? Well, the domain controller knows about it, and the client knows about it. Obviously, they know their own password. So what happens is the key is going to be hashed with that user's secret password. This is also known as the ticket granting ticket. If the client then can confirm the ticket granting ticket is legit, it'll send back the ticket granting ticket, okay, the TGT, back over here to the domain controller, and then the domain controller will validate that ticket granting ticket and send back to the user or to the client computer here a ticket granting session ticket, okay. And that's what really the user or the what we ultimately want. We want the ticket granting session ticket because that can then be used against other machines. So, for example, maybe this is a file server in the domain over here. Well, if we're in possession of the ticket granting session ticket, then we can present that to the file server. The file server says, hey, that could only have been signed or authenticated or granted by the domain controller. Therefore, I'm going to trust that and allow you to access the resources that you're asking for. All right, you ready to start hacking some passwords? Let's do it. Let's take a look here. We got a Windows Server 2003 box, and we can see here that there's Active Directory users and computers, and I've got a few additional users I've added in here just for sake of interest. I've got Ron Swanson here from Parks and Recreation, apparently. Helen of Troy decided to stop by. Who else? Alyssa Milano. Wow. Oh. Anyway, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got going on here. What I want to do is to figure out their passwords. So I can just use a utility called pwdump. This has gone through several different iterations. The current one I'm using is a beta version and it's pwdump version 6. But I'll just do pwdump like this, and then I'll send this out to, actually you have to do a -o, I think, for this now, to a text file called passwords.txt, and then you can specify the IP address as well of the host. And it's going to be locally here, so 127.0.0.1 should suffice. And then we see that it has now sent this out. There's also another tool you can use with this instead if you like, and it's called fgdump. Some people recommend it as well. Basically, it's going to use pwdump kind of behind the scenes, but I seem to actually get better results with pwdump at this time anyway. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this has given us. I'll do a notepad and then a passwords.txt, and we can see some things that are kind of interesting about all of this. For example, here's one of my user accounts. Now, do you notice anything interesting in this Charles in Charge user account? Well, if you're looking at this right here where it says 500, then you remember a lesson that we learned previously in this series. Let me go to change the font a little bit. Some of these are kind of small. Just a little bit bigger. There we go. Remember, the 500 means that is the administrator password. So now I've been able to figure out exactly who the administrator is. All right, and then we see some other accounts down here, and then of course there's Alyssa's SID right there, at least her the last few numbers of her SID. And then this hash right here represents her password. Who knows what in the world that is, but you get the idea, okay? Oh, you know what? There's one other clue we can get from looking at this. Actually, a couple things I want to point out. Number one, these are computer accounts. We're not really concerned about those right now. Computers also have passwords as well in Windows. But the other thing we want to look at is look at Alyssa and the last few characters of her hash. Remember, we divide a hash into two parts? Well, there's the first part there, and there's the second part over to the right. Okay, this is just kind of going into a backwards compatible hashing so that we can crack against it. Look at this one, Thomas Magnum. Yes, I do have Thomas Magnum here. I don't know why that went off to the right, but there's Thomas Magnum here. All right, and what in the world could his password be? Look at that. That kind of ends in the same thing as Ron Swanson, as Alyssa Milano, and maybe some others if I look for them. So there's about 3 accounts right there at least that seem to show similarities there towards the end. Remember when I talked earlier about password hashes, that if it's less than 7 characters, then that's easy to determine? That's why we can see that. You see how these all end in the same thing? Well, that's where we can identify that they're actually all going to be less than 7 characters. Now, you don't have to memorize that or anything. That's just something to point out. Oh, and let me also show you this. The password, remember, it's divided into 2 7-character fields. Well, the first 7 characters are over here. And there's no dividing line in here. There's no colon or anything to help you see that. But we'll see here that the second 7 character actually starts right here. And that's where you'll see the common hash between those 3 accounts that have less than 7 characters. Now then, armed with those password hashes and the usernames, let's go to a tool here called Kane. You really have to get Kane. The full name of the tool is Kane Enable, and you can get it from Oxid ID. If I go to help here, you can see where to get it from. It's this oxid.it. All right, this is possibly the most full-featured password cracker sniffer that there is. It's really kind of a Swiss Army knife of Windows hacking tools, and I strongly recommend it. I can't really go on enough about it. But anyway, what I want to do with this is I want to add to the list my hashes from the text file that I created a moment ago. So I'm going to browse for the passwords.txt file, and I just put that into a different location here. Let's see, where did I put that? Oh, it's in my documents. That's where it is. So there's my passwords.txt. I just copied it over here. This is also on a different computer. And that's the advantage of this. You can use the pw dump to dump all the files out to, your thumb drive or something like that, and then quickly abscond with it and get out of the building and go home and try to hack against these passwords. Now you can see here, there they all are. All right. Now what I want to do with this is maybe I want to start running some. I'm just selecting all these. You want to run a dictionary attack against all of these. Okay. So I can do let's just try some LAN manager hashes to begin with. Just do it. Keep it simple. And I'm going to add in a dictionary here to add to this list, and I'm going to find the dictionary. So let's go to. Actually, it goes into Program Files, Kane, and they have their own dictionary, a word list that you can work with here if you want to. All right, so there's a word list. And then what we can do is just go ahead and get this thing started, and you'll see that it's just going on and on and on, and it's starting to start hashing through some of these passwords. And I'll let this run for just a few seconds here, and we can see that it's already gotten several of these passwords. Now, why were these so easy? Remember, they're 7 characters or less, and that's this one, and that one, okay? And so it's able to quickly get these. Which one do you think Ferrari belongs to? Of course, it belongs to Thomas Magnum. Okay? So anyway, it got several of these quite easily. Now, why didn't it get all of them? Well, because some of them are complicated and are more difficult. They may have special characters, and they may also be longer. Some other things like that. They're not part of a dictionary attack that we got out of this word list. Oh, look at this one. That's a Zymotech or something like that. Now, that's kind of an interesting password. Anyway, so we were able to get some of these. It'll also tell you if it wasn't able to get the entire password here. So, for example, if I go look at, let me try to find another trainer, like this right here. This one, it was able to get the first several characters, like the first 7, and run hashes against that. But it's longer than 7 characters, so it was not able to complete that at this time. However, there are other tools that will do this, and also Kane Enable here will also do it if I give it enough time and if I do other kinds of attacks against this specific account. Now, let's see what else we could do about this. What I could do is I could do a dictionary attack again, and I'm going to go to the hashes, but I'm going to add a different word list or an additional list. I'll remove all of these first of all. And I've got a larger dictionary that I can add. This is one of the advantages that you want to do, is you want to get the biggest word lists that you can get. And I have here somewhere an unabridged dictionary. And I've got to get it to populate here. So there it is. I'm going to use this unabridged dictionary and get this started. Now I don't know how long this is going to take, so I may have to come back to it after a little while and see what it was able to come up with. Notice that I also selected only that one account, so we'll give it some time to go through that. Look at it, it's already 50% through, so it might not take too long. And there we go. I just paused recording for a moment and let it do its thing. And we can see now that it did get the password, Zymotechnics. And it didn't really take very long at all. So there's the password. By the way, what is Zymotechnics? Something having to do with the art of fermentation. I don't know. It's late in the day and I'm ready to call it. So maybe that's why I'm thinking about fermented drinks or something. Now another very cool thing you can do with this is you can run a sniffer over here. Look at this button right here, the Start Stop Sniffer. Okay, this is going to sniff the network for any kind of credentials that are going across the wire. Normally what you'll also want to do is some kind of ARP poisoning or something like that, especially if you're on a switch, because you want all the traffic to be directed to you. Otherwise, you cannot promiscuously sniff. And this is just a warning for the way that this network interface is configured. I'm going to go ahead and ignore that for the time being, just for our purposes. But what we would do is it would just park there and listen for any credentials that are coming across the wire. Again, best if it's in promiscuous mode, and then it will identify anything else that it was able to find. And it's kind of scary. Just let this run on your own computer for a day and see what it finds. It'll really frighten you. All right, now another tool I'd like to show you here is something called Curb Crack. This actually does have some capability to crack against some of the predictable hashing that Kerberos does use. It doesn't directly crack a Kerberos ticket, but it pretty much has the same effect in the end. Let's go ahead and see how this works. If I do a curb, let's see, go over here. If I do a curb sniff, Kerbsniff, it's actually a two-part tool, curb sniff and curb crack. The first thing you want to do is to sniff across the wire for any Kerberos activity. Again, you may need to put something in promiscuous mode. You may need to do ARP poisoning or some other method that makes sure that you're able to listen to promiscuous traffic on the network. Anyway, I'm going to send this out to curbs.txt, and it's just going to sit there. It's just going to capture packets. All right. Now, let's just do something that would require Kerberos here, such as maybe adding a computer to a domain. So here I'm on just an old crusty XP machine, and I think it's the only machine I have left that's not part of the domain, so I'm going to go over here and join it to the domain. And you'll know what happens here is that it asks for credentials when I tell it that I want it to join the nuggetlab.com domain. So I'll enter in the credentials. Hopefully I can remember that password. What was that? Zymo... Can I spell it? Zymotechnics. I think that was it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do this now. I've joined it to the domain, and I'll click OK, and then I'll click OK again, and it asks me to restart. Now, meanwhile, back over here on the location where I had launched Curb Sniff, look what it did. All of a sudden, there's two asterisks right there. What does that mean? This means that it was able to pick up two Kerberos tickets on the wire. That's all that's telling me, meaning that I might have something that I can actually work with now. Now, if I restart this computer, and I'll go ahead and let it do its thing here, restart the computer, and then when it comes back up and someone logs on, we may get another packet here. And I get impatient with it, so I just went ahead and press Control-C to stop it. And then I'm going to open this up in Notepad, and we can see that there's some hashing material that this item can work with. And you can see I joined it to the Nugget Lab domain as the trainer account. Now, how are we going to be able to take advantage of this? Well, we're going to use Curb Crack. So Curb Crack, and then I want to use curbs.txt. And then I'm going to use a dictionary, and it's going to be my unabridged dictionary. I think that's the correct spelling. Okay, and we'll just let it go ahead and crack away at this. And what it's going to do is it's going to run, compare all the passwords, run it through each one of them through a hash, and then it will compare it with the hashes that it found in the file. And when it gets one, we'll have a jackpot, and then it'll find out that it's been able to crack the password. Alright, I've just been waiting a little while here. It's going to take a little while to crack it. Cain and Abel seem to crack it much faster, so I'm just going to give this some time to kind of percolate. And not too smart of me, but I picked one of the passwords that's clear down at the end of the file. So we'll give this a little bit of time and come back and see if it's able to crack it. Now, while we're waiting as well, what's the advantage of this? Well, you see, this is where I can just be parked on the network. I might even be just a guest in the building on their Wi-Fi network. And if I can pick up some Kerberos traffic, that's passive scanning, really. It's not noisy. Nobody knows I'm there. I'm not doing ping sweeps or something like that. And I can just surreptitiously grab these Kerberos packets, save them out to a file, and again hack against them once I get home and be pretty much undetected. And I said you could do that as a wireless guest in the building. I wouldn't even have to be in the building in some places. Some places, they're not very careful about how they protect their Wi-Fi access points. I could be out in the parking lot and picking up a signal and still be able to get these Kerberos tickets. Oh my goodness, that took forever. Now, why does it say passwords cracked this far? That's because when we work with this file, let me actually open it up again here. We'll see that this account appears several different times. Even though it captured 2 tickets, there's several different credential opportunities within them, and they all just happen to be the Zymotechnics password. So anyway, once again, very easy to crack, although it took a little bit of time, and it was a dictionary password. More complicated passwords would probably require some form of a rainbow table, or a brute force attack, or a hybrid attack, all of which we'll talk about more in our next nugget. In this nugget, we talked about passwords. This was part 1, where we really specifically addressed Windows passwords. The Windows passwords can be found in different locations, as we showed you, such as in the repair directory, or also in Active Directory. We also looked at the hash methods that could be used for Windows passwords. And this is really critical to performing the demos that I showed you, because the hash, even though it's not reversible, it's easy to match if you do things such as a dictionary or a brute force attack. Now, in our next nugget, we'll talk about some password principles and things such as coming up with good passwords, other cracking methods, some reality checks that we have to address, and so forth. Well, it's about time for me to get my Zymotech on, so let's go ahead and take a break here and come back for the next nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.